8 a.m. is way too early to record a podcast, Joe Billig, yet here we are.
You're very gracious for letting us do this at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. So there's that. And kudos to Blake for joining us so early on the live stream, because I know it was very short notice, but he still made it. So good job, team.
He did, yep. And I'm not sure how much detail you want to go into, but kind of a strange circumstance which led to the rescheduling of this podcast.
Yeah, the plan was to record this 3 days ago on Friday, and it wasn't going to happen because I was in the middle of an insurance process, because it's 2 weeks ago today. We took our girls to the Great Wolf Lodge, did the whole water park thing, but in the process of that one night stay, our Suburban was stolen. Super fun. And the great people at the Great Wolf Lodge did not have cameras on this area, nor did Joe have any form of tracking inside the vehicle. Thus, it is now gone. And when I was going to be recording with Mike on Friday is when I was in the middle of phone calls and adjuster meetings and stuff and trying to determine what is the value of now gone Suburban. So super fun financial stuff going on there. But yes, we had our truck stolen. Not a fun experience.
Yeah, that really stinks. I'm very sorry to hear that. Probably brought a whole range of emotions, which is very appropriate for today's book.
That is probably one of the more forced segues I've heard from you, Mike. Well done.
Well, we're not ready to go there quite yet. We've got some follow-up to talk about here.
Yes.
So did you create a task management system diagram?
I have one started. I don't have it done. Part of that's because after you and I finished recording last time, we had this conversation about how Joe was going to publish this. And that kind of changed how in-depth this was going to be. And I've spent more time on this silly diagram, Mike, than I think I have ever spent on something simple and yet complex. So here we are. I have a very, I don't want to say a rough draft, because it's more than that. It's like a first or second draft on it, but it continues to morph on about an every other day, third day period. So I'm still kind of working through what that all will look like, but I need to have it in such a way that it can be published, whether it's on my blog or elsewhere. I don't know quite yet, but anyway, it's in progress. That's my point. So it does exist. I do have a draft, but I'm not ready to share it yet.
Okay, that's fair enough. My whole task management world was flipped upside down as I started doing some research into task management side of Obsidian, by the way. So mine is now out of date. Did you know you can do start dates for tasks in Obsidian and have system level notifications show up?
Yeah, you can do scheduled dates too, to where it doesn't show up until a day, and then you can have it show up only on that one day plus due dates. Yeah, you can do all of that. The trick with that is it's with any extra piece of metadata, right? Anytime you have the option for that, you have to be careful, because just because you can use it doesn't mean you should in your case.
Yeah, you shouldn't use all of them, but I have long been looking for the start dates, and the reminders just kind of blew my mind that you could actually have system level reminders, not in-app reminders. I figured you could get the little purple boxes to show up, but it's insane.
Purple.
So,
yeah. Obsidian's not blue. I always have to remind myself of that.
That's right. It's not. It's got the little purple stone as the icon, unless you used a custom icon, which I did.
Of course you did.
Yeah. So I will be documenting that experiment in the near future. We made it 3.5 minutes, I think, until I mentioned Obsidian.
Well done. Is that a record?
Probably not.
Definitely
not.
No.
My follow-up here was to collect more models. And I don't think I have collected any specific models, but I have written in the past couple of weeks about my theme for the year, which is the year of recalibration. And it's kind of all based on mental models and collecting new ones and understanding there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't really know. So I could put a link in the show notes to the newsletter that I sent out about that if people are interested. But this is an ongoing project, and I feel even more strongly after the last couple of weeks that this is kind of the thing for me this year, is to just reevaluate everything, and the way to do that is through collecting these models. So nothing specific that I have collected and put inside of said Obsidian database, but it's in progress and will continue to be in progress probably for the rest of my life.
Yeah, you're basically saying you're never going to stop thinking. That's essentially what you're confessing.
Well, it's thinking in a specific direction. So when I talk about the year of recalibration, it's basically all the things that I've assumed and I've kind of built my habits and routines around. I want to challenge all that stuff. And the way you challenge it is you get different contradictory, maybe, perspectives towards some of that stuff. And so I feel that is very much in line with the mental models. And maybe it's not framed as mental models. Maybe it's just, hey, did you ever think about this? So one of the things, I guess, one part of this that I have completed in the last couple of weeks is just the whole, like, what time I wake up. Because for those who don't know, I've been diagnosed with epilepsy. And so one of the things that can trigger a seizure is not getting enough sleep. So I have to sleep my 8 hours every night. Otherwise, I am not going to drive, and I got to be really, really careful, just because it's a stressor, and you can't really like tell when a seizure is going to come on. And I haven't had one in 20 plus years at this point because I've been so careful with this stuff. But so just get up earlier, that's not really an option for me. A whole bunch of things need to change in order for that to happen. And for the last couple of years, up until I broke my hand, I have been getting up probably about 6:45, 7 a.m. Because I got to get my 8 hours of sleep, and just that's the natural time. By the time everybody comes home from church or wherever we are at night, basketball game, get all the kids in bed, downshift, my wife and I go to bed. Like, that's just kind of the natural rhythm. But I want to push that forward. And so it requires a whole lot of Herculean effort, it feels like sometimes, to put things in other places. And then also, instead of going to the gym for an hour in the middle of the day, we have a rowing machine, which was a COVID purchase when we couldn't go to the gym. And I've just been trying to do like these intense rowing workouts in the mornings, just 10, 15 minutes, get a little bit of a sweat first thing in the morning. And then I'll get to the gym if it works later on, but at least I've done something, and trying to do that before the rest of my regular morning routine, before I start my actual work. And that's all. Like, I've already made that change, kind of inspired by another Gap book that I had read earlier this year, the 5 a.m. Club, which I'm not sure I would recommend. But there's like this ideal day towards the end of that book. And I looked at some of the elements of it, and I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So I'm trying to figure out how that works for me. So I guess you could say it's kind of an experiment based off of a new mental model, a new old mental model of getting up early.
It sounds like you're collecting a whole bunch of stuff. Like there's a lot inside of that, which I would imagine the book that we're going to cover today throws a lot in that, knowing how many different things and thoughts this book gave me. I think I'm itching to get into this one, Mike, but like there's just a lot in here that I feel like would fit into the concept of doing more models in your note system. But I also know that if you don't have like a good way to process your thinking, like you and I do this over Bookworm, you do a lot of it in your writing inside of Obsidian text files and such. Like if you don't have a good way of processing your thoughts, I feel like it's easy to get caught up in bad models, like in bad routine thinking, and you don't really have a good way of getting out of that unless you have someone else to bounce it off of, or again, some way to write it down.
Agreed. Yeah, we can get into today's book. Just real quickly, though, that rowing machine, that is Blake's fault. It is the Concept 2 Model D. It's a great rowing machine, very expensive, But yeah, I believe this is going to be my justification for making it a good purchase. I definitely have not used it enough to justify it yet, but so far last couple of weeks, this getting up early and using the rowing machine has been great. Gets my blood going, makes me awake, which I really need after the last week. By the way, I did this like cleanse fast sort of a thing. Did a complete fast a couple of days, but otherwise like just fruit and veggies, water, gave up coffee for a week, and made me very sleepy. There were a couple nights I slept like 12 hours.
I don't think I could pull that off if I wanted to. Like, I would have to be sick to pull that off, I think. It just doesn't work. I've tried it before. Like, staying in bed 8.5 hours is borderline painful for me.
Yeah. Well, it was an
Can't
organized fast that we did with our church, but definitely had a lot of health benefits as well, and kind of a reset. I had done this at the beginning of the year for a lot of years in a row, and hadn't done it the last couple years. So yeah, I was definitely due. Felt good once you get over the being tired all the time the first couple of days.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, let's get into today's book, which is The Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown, the book that you did not think I would pick.
Not at all. Not at all. You totally threw me off guard when you picked this one.
So just curious, why were you so surprised when I picked this one? Why did you think this is not a Mike book?
So this might get into bookworm stereotypes, possibly.
That's fine.
In that I feel like your type of book has a tendency to be like all about daily routine, repetitive actions, right? So it's habits, it's routines, it's traditions, I don't want to say systems now that I've learned too much about systems, and it's like that style, I guess.
You probably would have said systems prior to reading Thinking in Systems would be my guess.
Prior to last book, yeah. Yeah. But then it's usually me who picks the one that's like way out there and a little bit weird and gets all kind of borderline touchy-feely and breaks the mold, and like that's kind of where I tend to push us. So I feel like this one being heart-driven versus logistical-driven, I guess, kind of breaks that mold in my head, which is why like when you said Atlas of the Heart, like this was right up there in the realm of books I was looking at, which would make me think that this is kind of my stereotypical book, which is probably why I really enjoyed reading this. But I was not expecting it from you. I just wasn't. So there's that.
Are you calling me cold and mechanical, Joby Lig?
Completely cold and mechanical. That is exactly what I was getting at. No.
Nah, I'm just kidding. You're right, though. And as I reflect back on some of the books that I have selected for Bookworm versus the books that you've selected for Bookworm, I can see how you arrived at that. I think what I realized with picking, there was another one recently that kind of surprised you. I forget which one it was. I realized that the way that I pick books is I pick the ones that are about a topic I'm interested in. And it is maybe a little bit weird that my interest has kind of gone in this direction, but I also think maybe it's not unnatural. That was really the place it was going to go. If you look back at the history, like, okay, well, we've exhausted the habits and routines. Now let's move to something else. And we haven't completely exhausted it. I know there's other stuff out there, but
always.
I feel like I've gotten to the point where like, that's enough. Okay, let's try something else now. And then kind of going in line with the theme of recalibration and leaning into the things that I don't know as much about, or maybe make me a little bit uncomfortable. When I picked this one, didn't feel like it was unnatural at all, to be honest. But I guess it's just because I have my perspective on this, and I can see how I got to this point, and this was just kind of like, oh yeah, this looks cool, and very much in line with examining the parts of me that have not been looked at for a while, maybe.
Sure.
So, but yeah, this book is interesting. It's not really a book I don't know. It doesn't really fit the bookworm mold, to be honest. It's more like an encyclopedia about emotions. It's a beautiful hardcover book if you do get that version. I do recommend people get that version, not the Kindle version, because it's full color and there's so many pictures and so much beautiful typography and the layout is great. And it's a work of art. And it is definitely worth the $16 or whatever it was to get it off of Amazon. So, link in the show notes. By the way, if you want to support the podcast, all of the book links, all the links to every book that we mention are in the show notes, and those are all affiliate links. So when you buy a book that way, we get a little kickback. So thanks for considering doing that. And if you don't like Amazon affiliate links, there you go. Now you can avoid them. It's broken down into 13 different sections, and it covers, I think I said 87 different emotions. So my thought is that we can just kind of crank through the different parts, because I think the way that they are broken up is really interesting. And then as we go through the different parts, maybe we touch on one or two emotions, maybe one each that she talks about in these different points. I've got a few points for just as I was taking notes in my MindNode file here, things I wanted to talk to you about from a couple of these areas. But I don't think this book lends itself to a very deep back and forth conversation about a topic. Now, famous last words as we go off the rails, and we do that anyways.
Right.
But
that's kind of what we do, right? But you're right. This isn't a we're going to go on a journey book and we're going to make one point across the entire book. That's not what this is. This is borderline a dictionary. And I say that because, and I'm sure you'll get to this, there's 13 parts in this book, and they're all places we go, as they're titled. And underneath of those are individual emotions. But most of what you're getting is that when she goes to each of those independent emotions, she will define it and then tell you about it. Tell a story about it, explain the research behind it, and how we should maybe manage it in some cases, like what to do about it, how to contradict it in some cases, how to bring about the good ones more often. She'll do that, but for the most part, it's here's what this is, and here's how it affects us. So it's not necessarily a prescriptive book in that sense. Like there's not a straightforward call to action out of this. Well, I shouldn't say that. There is a point at the very end where she does have a bit of a call to action, but it's not even really made that way. So all that to say, like, I feel like this is one that you can easily like sit on and then come back to regularly. This is one of those that I think I'm just going to have around just to look things up. Like, wait a second, what was that again? So I don't think this is one that you can process very quickly all at once. It's something I think you're going to have to reference back to in the future.
yes, I love the style of this book, and we'll get into style and rating obviously at the end. But I think it's important to mention here at the beginning that there's a whole bunch of research, a whole bunch of studies. She's got a whole research team that she works with, and she does an incredible job of balancing that research with her own personal stories. So she has lots of examples for all of these different emotions, and it's not the same cookie cutter approach to each and every one of them. So it's a really interesting approach to a book. And you mentioned there isn't a call to action. I would say at the beginning, there is a call to adventure, let's say, because she talks about how this, it's in the title, the Atlas of the Heart, right? And this harkens back to something that we had heard from the great mental models. The number one was the map is not the territory. So that's all about like taking the role of the map maker and redefining the scope of the territory or the land in front of you. And that's kind of what she's saying here. Let's just talk real briefly about the introduction here. She talks about being a map maker and a traveler. And I feel like this is a really cool metaphor that sets up the rest of the book, because at the beginning she talks about how most people can only identify a couple of emotions, mad, sad, and glad, basically. And there's 87 of them that she defines here. I keep saying that number because it kind of blows my mind. And she's basically encouraging us to explore some of these. And that can be uncomfortable. I found as she's naming all of these, I kind of think back to points in my life where I have felt each and every one of these. And I didn't for all of them have like a direct connection for some of that stuff, but at least I was asking myself the question as we went into each and every section, when have I felt this before? And she says right in this introduction, there's 3 essential questions. Where am I? How did I get here from there? And how do I get there from here? So I think that's really important as you're considering kind of doing a self-analysis of your own emotional state and being able to correctly label how you're feeling now that you have a whole bunch more vocabulary to use. And then you can kind of see, oh, these are the factors that brought me to this place, good or bad. And if I want to go somewhere else, what direction do I need to head?
Yeah, there's a lot that you can discern from each of these, in that, like, as you're going through them, like, okay, when have I experienced this? And sometimes that can bring back very good memories. In a lot of cases, it brings back the pain. And I have to admit, this is easily the most I've ever cried reading a book for Bookworm. I don't know if this is your experience, but this is the way it was for me. Like, there's some stories in here that bring back things that are not easy to process. And you're reading these stories and you're just working through times you've been wrong, times you've made mistakes, when you've been humiliated. Like, all of these things come back. And the way that she tells the story and the way she explains it is so raw. Okay. I don't want to be that guy that's sitting over here in a corner crying while I'm reading a book, a nonfiction book for that matter. And here I am. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this book down for a while because I can't do this right now. Like, that's what this did, at least to me. Maybe that's just me being an emotional person, but that was my experience. And yes, there are some of these that bring back and help you understand. It's like, oh, that's what's going on. Like, if you have difficult situations you're going through right now, it's like, okay, well, how is that person doing right now, and why are they acting the way that they are? There's probably a lot more going on in those situations, and I know that's kind of vague the way I'm saying that. It's intentional at the moment, but there's just a lot of different aspects that you could take with these, from seeing them in situations you're dealing with, from looking at your own past, from pains that you're going through, joys that you're going through. There's a lot of these that can bring back a lot of emotions. So if you are reading this or planning to read this, just be aware, like, you're going to go on a trip when you read this one.
It's true. I mean, that's not an unexpected response, I don't think, because one of the things I jotted down in the MindNode file is in the introduction that being able to communicate about emotions is part of healing. And my response to all of the emotions that she listed here was, I now have a much bigger vocabulary in order to communicate about these emotions with. And so if you experience something, especially something traumatic, and you don't have the vocabulary to talk about it, I think it's very natural to just shut it down and not fully process it. And then when you go back and read this book and you read about some of these emotions and you hear some of her stories, and then maybe that triggers something, like you went through something similar, I can totally see how you would just be a mess after reading some of these. That's actually, let's put a pin in that because I want to dissect that a little bit further. Part 1 is places we go when things are uncertain or too much. And I asked you about this earlier, and you said you were cool talking about it. So I'm just going to go for it. If you think this is too much, then just push back.
Okay.
We'll cut it out. But you mentioned that you just had your Suburban stolen. So you were fighting with insurance to prove that it was worth as much as you said it, or more than what they were saying it was. So probably a whole bunch of these in this section you're going through right now. Do you mind kind of just talking through some of this and maybe some of the stuff that you were feeling? And if there's one particular you want to dissect a little bit further, we can do that on air. And hopefully you won't cry.
Yeah, so some of I don't think I'll cry on air here, but so the emotions underneath of this, so places we go when things are uncertain or too much, those are stress, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, avoidance, excitement, dread, fear, vulnerability. Like, these are all things that are, in most cases, things we don't want to talk about, right? And in the case of the Suburban, it was one of those, when it first happened, there wasn't really a, oh gosh, what just happened? I feel violated. I didn't have that at all. I don't know if that's a factor of the books that we've read, Mike, but in my stance, it was, what just happened? Is that actually what happened? It was more of a disbelief than anything at the beginning. And then it became pure logistical to me. And I don't know if that's just my protector sense coming in, trying to take care of my family. I don't know what that is, but I went straight into, okay, how do we get home? Because we're obviously not home right now. Well, okay, so rental car, it's part of our insurance, blah, blah, blah. That all came together very easily. And then on top of that, there is the stress of, okay, well, now I've got to talk to the police and I've got to work with the detective and we've got to try to figure out how to find the thing. And it's very likely not going to happen. Like, there's all these things that have to happen logistically. And yet, for me, I can't say that I've been stressed in the situation until I started working with the insurance side, because a lot of it was out of my control. And at the same time, I felt very overwhelmed by it, if I'm using some of these terms here, but just because it was so much that had to happen, which is why we ended up moving Bookworm from Friday, because it just seemed like I've got to figure out some very fine details of what is the price difference between a Suburban that has a bench in the middle row versus one that has bucket seats. Like, that's the level of detail I had to get to, and I had not even 2 hours to get to those answers and have raw data to prove it. That's basically what I had to get down to. Now, since then, I can tell you that it worked out. I reached a settlement with the insurance company, one that I think we're both happy with. So that has all worked out. It was worth it. But the time crunch and the not knowing puts you in a spot where emotions are very high, and it gets very difficult to work through that. Something I was not expecting, because I work in IT. I deal with stressful situations all the time, almost daily. People will have issues 3 minutes before a service starts, an event starts, and I go in and restart their computer, and of course they just completely freak out. It's like, we don't have time for that. It's like, yeah, you do. They'll wait. It'll be okay. And I'm completely calm in that situation, and it just drives people up the wall. So I deal with that stuff all the time, so it doesn't freak me out. But I will tell you that I know that someone else in the same position I was talking to the police would freak out. And I know that because I wasn't the only one that had a vehicle stolen that night. There was someone else that had a minivan stolen as well, which in my head, I'm like, why would you steal a minivan? That's what went through my head. But anyway, the other gentleman who they were working with to try to figure out, simple stuff. What's the VIN number? What's the license plate? What's the thing look like? Where'd you park? Like, these are very basic things that police need to know. They're not going to find your vehicle if they don't know your license plate number, right? I had written all that down and handed it over to him on a note card because I knew they were going to want it ahead of time. The other guy was completely freaking out. He just kept explaining how he had booked the reservation and it wasn't his car, it was his father-in-law's, and he's not sure why they would pick his car and what are we going to do? How am I going to get home? Like, these were the questions he was asking the police whenever they would ask him, what's your license plate number? It's like, that doesn't help at all. He just completely freaked out and wasn't able to slow down and process that. So I watched this guy, and of course the police got frustrated and said, fine, we'll come back to you. Do you know your license plate number? And looked at me. It's like, here you go. This is, I think, everything you need to know. And they asked me like 2 questions. I was there for 30 seconds and I was gone. Like, that's as far as it went. So I say that because I think there's something to do, and this is why I say, Mike, I think there's something to do with maybe the books and things that we've learned over the last however many years now of reading, that stressful situations, you can either freak out about them, as this guy was doing, or you can take your time, process it, and run with it, decide what to do next, and you're fine. But as far as like the emotions behind it, mine came later. It wasn't at the onset. It's been more with the insurance side of it than anything. I don't know if that answers your questions.
It does. That is the Joe Bulig response I expected. Here's everything you need to know. Now go do your job.
Yes. Yeah. But, exactly.
From our conversations on Friday, I could tell you were a little bit stressed, and I'm actually pretty impressed that you got resolution within a couple of hours. I could totally see how if you don't have any resolution and like, okay, well, we'll get back to you. Like if I was in that situation, it ruins my whole weekend.
Right. It totally could. Yeah. And that's I have had that beat into me a little bit over the last 6 months or so because of the house remodel we went through. I told Becky this, absolutely. It's like so much of that remodel prepped me for things like this because it's out of my control when I can get supplies. It's out of my control when I can get subcontractors in. Like so many things are out of my control that you kind of get forced into, okay, well, you just make your backup plans and you really can't change it. So there's no point in me getting upset. So, I was in the middle of waiting for police case numbers and an official from the rental company for when we were going to get a car to get home. And I had a good 3 hours to wait, 2 hours to wait. So I went to the water park and went down the slides with the kids. Like, it doesn't do me any good to sit around and wait and stress about the thing. So let's go have some fun and do the lazy river and freak the kids out with, raft rides that are too fast for them. And we'll have fun. So that's what we did.
So you mentioned the lazy river, and one of our favorite movies lately has been Flora and Ulysses. Are you familiar with this?
No, that's new to me.
I think it's a classic book that was remade as a movie on Disney Plus, and there's a point in there where the little girl is reflecting on better days when her parents were together and they used to go to the water park, and her dad used to bring an extra swimming suit and put it in the lazy river just to watch the lifeguards freak out. And now I kind of want to do that.
Yeah, I would definitely be up for that.
Cool. Yeah, we should probably move on. But the other thing that I liked from this section was vulnerability. Vulnerability is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But the thing that I like about this is that there is no courage without vulnerability. Harkening back, obviously, to Courage is Calling, which we both loved, the Ryan Holiday book. And it just is very appropriate for me with some of the stuff that I'm going through right now. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there. And it is all working out. Harkening back to a Gap book that I read, The Power of Positive Thinking. That one seems to come up over and over and over again. I love that book. We should probably cover that one for Bookworm at some point. By Norman Vincent Peale. Definitely not for everybody, but there's a phrase in that book, everything is always working out for me. And I've kind of been saying that over and over again. And when I started doing that, that's actually the day after that is when I broke my hand. But it's healed. I went to the doctor, got the all clear. I got to play guitar on the worship team yesterday at church. Still a little stiff, but it's all good. So it's kind of interesting to me how like all that temporary stuff can trigger any of these emotions. But when you take a step back and you see big picture, it ends up being not quite as bad or even good as you think in the moment. It's less extreme. Everything is kind of more even keeled. But vulnerability is the thing for me now. And if I were to create an action item from this, which I don't have any action items, I don't think, because like you said, this is an encyclopedia, but it would be to put myself in more vulnerable situations, very much in line with the theme of recalibration.
Yeah. And just to echo some of what you're saying is like, she mentions that vulnerability is one of those things that it's one of the last things we want to do, but it's one of the first things we expect of other people. Like we want other people to share their heart and be open, but it's one of the last things that we want to do. And it's such a weird thing, because the moment you do share vulnerability and you're not completely, cold and calculated and everything's perfect, if you do share your unknowns and your questions, you're seen as more credible. So it's contradictory, kind of, but it's exactly as you would expect at the same time.
Yeah, true. Yeah, there's so much in this book. We're not even going to touch on a tenth of it, especially at this rate, because we got to get moving.
This could be a 6-hour episode if you wanted it to be.
It totally could. All right, let's talk about part 2, which is places we go when we compare. And I'll just, as we go through each of these parts, you did this for part 1, and I'll continue to do this just so people know what's in here. But we won't talk about all of these. The emotions listed here are comparison, admiration, reverence, envy, jealousy, Schadenfreude, and Freudenfreude? Schadenfreude. Okay, and then Freudenfreude. Is that how you say that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So obviously there's some cool names we could dissect here, but the one that I think sets the stage for everything in here is comparison, which is not actually an emotion, but it does drive all sorts of feelings, so she includes it. But the thing that I jotted down that stood out to me from this section is that comparison is a creativity killer. And she has this phrase, which I think defines this more perfectly than I have ever heard in my entire life, which is the pressure to be like everyone else, but better.
Exactly.
You ever feel that?
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, it stops me from doing a lot of things too, because I see people who are better at me than, take video editing, for example. So I'm not going to release videos because there's other people that are way better at it than me. Well, I'm comparing to them, but I don't want to do anything or act on it unless I'm better than them. So I'm comparing, but I want to be better. It's a vicious cycle.
It is.
Don't do it.
It is. Yeah, I don't think we need to go into a whole lot here other than the Schadenfreude. This is pretty insidious. This is deriving pleasure or joy from someone else's suffering or misfortune. So definitely avoid this. This requires counter empathy. I think empathy is probably going to come up in a lot of these, but it's obviously very much tied to the places we go when we compare ourselves to somebody else. When you see somebody else being successful, are you happy for them, or do you kind of resent the fact that they are successful? So interesting how this ties back to Mindset by Carol Dweck, and just the frame of, or the perspective of, if there's only so much success to go around, then someone else being successful means that there's less for me, and I gotta do whatever I can to get as much as I can, or viewing it as this is not a zero-sum game. There's enough success for everybody, which is more in line with my school of thought. But there was definitely a point before reading that book that I felt that way. So it's also kind of interesting to me reading this, as you mentioned, at this point in our lives, after we've covered 136 other books. 136 books, Joe. This is number 137. That's crazy. So we've developed maybe a little bit of emotional intelligence as we have gone through a lot of other books.
Yeah, the Schadenfreude that you mentioned, in case somebody missed it, it's like that's when you get joy or pleasure from somebody else's pain or suffering or misfortune. And if you combine that with some of the other emotions that we'll talk about a little bit later, and then overlay like our political and societal culture, which she does call out here, it's almost sickening to think about how it perpetuates this cycle of hate and how it forces us into a world of just not liking another person because of something very simple that we don't even understand entirely. If someone has a different belief system than you, or wants to make their own choice in a situation, and you wish ill on them and get excited when they're hurt, you're in a bad place. Like, you're in a really bad place, whether you realize that or not. So yeah, it's something you need to address very quickly, because it leads to some very dangerous situations, which, again, she talks about later.
Agreed. So don't go there, which is kind of the whole point in sharing
it.
Some of this stuff is like you can identify where you want to end up and where you want to avoid entirely. This is one of those ones that you want to stay away from. All right. The next section here is part 3, which is places we go when things don't go as planned. And again, reading through the emotions here: boredom, disappointment, expectations, regret, discouragement, resignation, and frustration. Any of these stand out to you?
Just the first one there, the boredom piece. Well, that and frustration, but the boredom piece, she spells out that a lot of times there's the historical or cliche almost phrase whenever people say that, if I'm bored, well, I'll find something for you to do. Like that's what I grew up with. Like a lot of people hear that with kids. Like you kids say, I'm bored. Great. I've got some work for you to do. There's stuff on the floor that needs cleaned up. You can pick up stuff in the kitchen. You can wash dishes. I've got wood that needs moved from place to place. Like there's lots of things I can give you to do. But she even tells the stories here of how she learned to simply wait whenever her kids would say that, because it was not very long before they started doing something creative and, super interesting or fun for themselves, because they just made something up. They imagined something and were able to learn something. So boredom is a place where we can be very creative and a lot of great ideas come from. So a lot of times we think of boredom as a bad thing, when in fact it's a very good thing if you're willing to sit in it and work your way through that. So boredom was one of them that stood out to me. The other one was the frustration piece. And part of that's because I have a bank of things that have royally frustrated me in recent weeks. Some of that involves the Suburban. Some of it is just work stuff. Some of it is just my own choices that I'm not happy with. And sometimes, and a lot of times, there are things that are just out of my control that I feel like I want to change, but I can't. So I get frustrated by it. And it's easy to see how that can lead to things like anger. And she even calls that out. But it's also that just because you're frustrated by something, you have to make the choice as to what to do about it. And whenever you make the choice and start moving towards action in the case, instead of just sitting in the frustration, that's the only real time that you're able to get out of that, is to start moving and stop just sitting in it. So that would be the thing that I need to learn. It's like, 'cause I like to just wallow in the frustration and just be upset about it and, make it worse, when really I need to just get off my tail and, go help somebody else with something similar to get over that. So don't be like Joe. Get up and move.
Kind of interesting as we talk through this that we, I think, both kind of focus and gravitate towards the ones where we have failed instead of the ones where we have wins.
Yeah.
But
oh yeah, definitely.
I think that's probably natural, but it'd be interesting to hear if other people had that same response as they read through this. The one that I want to talk about from this section real quickly is disappointment. And there's a statement here which I think is very powerful. On page 50, she says, "There are too many people in the world today who decide to live disappointed rather than risk feeling disappointed. And disappointment is simply unmet expectations." So that to me sounds a lot like the doorway to resignation. Like, I'm just not even going to try because I might figure out that I can't do it. And that harkens back to something she said. I wrote it down in part 1, but it applies to a lot of different emotions throughout this book. For anxiety, which can be either a trait or a state. So a lot of these emotions can be either a state, which is a temporary condition, or become a trait and be part of our personality. And I don't remember if she said this directly or not, but it seems to me the ones that become a part of our personality, those are conditioned over time. It's not like you're born with this, and there are things that you can do to overcome it as you develop your own emotional intelligence, I would think. But when it comes to disappointment, and that harkens to the vulnerability piece that I talked about from part 1, like, don't not do something because you might fail at it and you might feel disappointed. Because if you don't try, you will live disappointed for the rest of your life, potentially.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's very easy to take something that's a temporary emotion and turning it into like a long-term personality trait. Like you can do that. Don't do that.
Seems like every single section we end with, don't do that.
It's like my kids, sometimes they will do something and they hurt themselves. And I regularly joke with trying to lighten the mood. And a lot of times that way they don't turn it into a complete meltdown. Like, hey, don't do that. It hurts when you do that. And I tell them that.
Yep.
And I remember what it was. Something over the weekend, I did something. I dropped a hammer or something and it hit me. And it's like, ouch. Like I made that comment. It's one of those, like, it more surprised me than anything. And my oldest, Emma, just like, Dad, don't do that. It hurts when you do that. It's like, thanks, Emma.
Turns out.
Appreciate that. Thanks for being my parrot. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I guess that brings us to part 4.
Yep. Part 4, places we go when it's beyond us. And again, the emotions are awe, wonder, confusion, curiosity, interest, and surprise. And I think this is kind of interesting. These are primarily, I would say, positive, as opposed to the first couple sections here. There's a lot of negative ones. If you're going to label them, positive versus negative.
Yeah.
But when it's beyond us, this is the one, that description kind of triggers a negative response from me, because in the natural, I want to control everything. Very logical, high fact finder. This is the thing I want to avoid at all costs, just my personality.
Yeah, this is where, and I get where she has spent a lot of time trying to pick the words here. I know that she has been very careful in choosing these, but like part 3 is places we go when things don't go as planned. Places we go when it's beyond us is part 4. If you start looking at those, you could easily get to a point where you say, well, those are kind of the same thing. If it's beyond us, it didn't go as we thought it would. But if it's didn't go as planned, well, it's beyond us. Like you could easily make that jump. But I think what she's getting at is that if it didn't go as planned, it means you had a preconceived expectation with it. Whereas when it's beyond us, you had no expectation. Like she tells the story of her daughter who, they were on a lake and she was just kicked back making a picture memory, as she called it. And like that is something that created awe in Brené. So like it's just something that, you don't expect to see it. She mentions that these are a lot of times tied to nature, a spiritual experience, something that's more artistic, I guess. And I could see how she gets to that point. But you're right. These are absolutely more of the, if you had to term it, more of a positive side.
Any in here that you really want to discuss?
I don't think any more than that. I mean, it's fairly straightforward on these. I don't have any of that are like, I have struggles with this, because these are the fun ones. These aren't painful ones.
They are the fun ones. I think the one I want to lean into is the curiosity, which again goes in line with the year of recalibration. This again is both a trait and a state, and it involves both feeling and thinking. It doesn't exist without interest, which is a cognitive openness to engaging with a topic or experience. So you combine those, and you very much get the state that I described in the in the beginning. I think naturally I tend to fall back into the things that I know. So this is not a natural response for me, but it's something I want to embrace in the next year. So hopefully as we continue to read books like this that push me outside my comfort zone, I can check that as complete.
There you go.
All right. I've been doing a lot of talking about the emotions. You want to introduce part 5?
Yeah. So part 5, places we go when things aren't what they seem. These are amusement, bittersweetness, nostalgia, cognitive dissonance, paradox, irony, sarcasm. I have a couple things here. One is on sarcasm, because this was kind of convicting to me, because I tend to be very sarcastic and just making extreme comments or twisting words just for fun. Like I do this. If you've listened to Bookworm for more than 3 seconds, you know that Joe tends to be sarcastic. And one thing that stood out to me is the fact that kids can't pick that up until, what was it, like age 10, 9 or 10, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And
true. Yep.
I might be a bad father. Like that crossed my mind whenever I read that. It's like, I do this all the time and don't even realize I'm doing it. It's such a thing that's so ingrained in me that I make these comments all the time, and I'm sure that it frustrates my children. So that was very convicting to me. It's like, I was not aware of that. That never crossed my mind. I assumed they were picking up what I was getting, and it makes sense why my almost 9-year-old is now getting it and starting to be the same. And I realize, oh, the other two have no clue. That might explain why the one gets really upset when I do that once in a while. So I should probably stop that. So anyway, that was something that stood out. The other one was that with nostalgia, did this one strike you? Because like, I think of nostalgia as like the quintessential picture I have in my head is the guy who's at the bar telling some football story from when he was in high school. And he's reflecting on the thing that he was doing at the time because it was, the highlight of his life. Like that's what I have in my head whenever I think of nostalgia, which anyway, that's kind of what I saw.
The picture I get is Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. Coach would have put me in, we would have been state champs. No doubt in my mind.
I did not realize that the term nostalgia, it comes from two Greek words, nostos and alga, which means homecoming and then pain. The term came from the 1600s when a medical student was dealing with some Swiss soldiers, I think, that were mercenaries that were fighting wars a long ways from home for an extended amount of time, and they were literally getting sick from missing home. And he termed this disease nostalgia. So nostalgia was an illness, and today we think of it as just reflecting on the good old days, when really the intentional part of that word is just, you are ill. You need to let that go. It is painful to be focusing on that, which I don't think actually is the current day definition of that. It's just that's the origin of it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I think I have seen tinges of this, and this is kind of interesting because I see a lot of parents of kids that are older than ours, whether they are significantly older than Rachel and I or just, a little bit older, kind of in the same stage of life, but had children earlier. They will make these comments of like, oh, I remember when little Johnny was 2 years old and used to do this. And man, I really miss that. And I've never felt like I really miss those days. I enjoy them when they're happening. I love the fact that Adelaide can't say marshmallow and says farm fellow instead. Or because I leave for church early to be on worship team. She's like, Dad, you going to go to church? Church. And I that stuff is humorous to me, but as she learns to say words, I don't have that like, oh, she can't, she does it right now. I don't understand that part of it really, just not the way my brain works. I mean, I get it, like why other people feel that way, but I've kind of fought to not fall into that myself and just make the most of every moment along the journey so that when they are older and they leave the house, I don't say, oh, I wish I would have done this with my kids. But I think that's a version of this, and I can totally see how that kind of, doesn't seem like it's real major, but it kind of triggers and some of that negative sadness and the yearning for the way things used to be. And if I've learned anything from this book, that can kind of lead you into some dark places if you're not careful, but you're not guaranteed to go there either. So I don't think it's like avoid this at all costs, but just kind of interesting. The other one that I like from this is cognitive dissonance, which again is because this is in line with my theme. Cognitive dissonance is when you have that state of tension that occurs when you hold two cognitions, which are ideas, attitudes, beliefs, or opinions that are psychologically inconsistent with each other. As I look to understand things more and can collect models that contradict my current worldview, maybe. I know this is going to come with the territory and I'm going to have to wrestle through this. But she even says in this section that it's important to invite new information to the table. So just the fact that there's cognitive dissonance isn't a bad thing unless you tend to run for the hills when you feel it and avoid those things because they challenge your current belief systems and your traditions. I actually think that if you collect contrary opinions and beliefs, and you wrestle through this cognitive dissonance, it can actually reinforce your beliefs and make them stronger. It's kind of like you're tested by fire. If it's not challenged, it's not very strong. And the fact that you have to kind of wrestle through and reconcile these things in your head sometimes is galvanizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we go to part 6 here, places we go when we're hurting. This is when we started to get to points where Joe started crying a lot. So the emotions underneath of here: anguish, hopelessness, despair, sadness, grief. These are ones that are very painful to experience. She tells stories of losing a dog, or she told the story of her reaction to something that happened, but then she didn't actually tell us what happened. She got a phone call, and it was devastating. She ended up needing to go home when they were on their way to an event, church. I don't remember where they were going. But these are ones that are difficult. And if I have to summarize all of them, because there's a lot, and you could go into each one of these independently, and if you want to pick one out, go for it, Mike. But anguish, hopelessness, despair, sadness, grief, like they kind of all work together in some way or another. Obviously, I've mentioned before that I work at a church and I run sound and such for funerals. I've got a really big one coming up on Saturday, which is going to be very painful, and I'm aware of that. And it's a very big tech thing for me because the funeral is going to be so large. A very prominent figure in our 5-state area is having his service at our church. And it's not something that I take lightly, but at the same time, it means that I've got close to 25 different people helping me run the thing. So I've got a lot logistically and technically that I've got to run. But at the same time, it means that I've got a lot of people helping me run it who are hurting deeply and have had to work with people who are in such dire straits that it's difficult for them to make good decisions. Having read this and realizing like how those different emotions impact our decision-making process, which she doesn't spell out specifically, but she at least explains like how you get there and what to do about it in some cases. But it's been very helpful and informative to me because I have no connection to this person. So thankfully in this case, like I'm kind of the clear-headed one and can work my way through it. But it means that a lot of times I have to like, okay, settle down. I understand what you're going through. Let's set that emotion aside. Let's focus on the technical right now. I'm not trying to be insensitive. We just need to make this decision, and then we can process the emotion thing afterwards. But we don't have time to do that part right now. But those are two separate things. So trying to spell that out helps people in this case. It doesn't always. Sometimes that's the absolute worst thing you could do. Like you need to stop feeling that emotion because we need to make a decision about. Like that's not helpful in many, many cases, but in this particular one, it does seem to help folks. I don't know how I got there, but anyway, places we go when we're hurting.
Yeah, the pet thing you'd mentioned, that brought back emotions when our previous dog had to be put down, and it was a very traumatic circumstance when we had a cockapoo, so Cocker Spaniel Poodle mix, about 20 pounds. And he was getting older, and his back had been messed up from when he was must have been like 2 or 3. We had him on a leash outside, and he just like, not a very smart dog, just like took off and got snapped back when he reached the end of his leash, and ended up hurting his back. So as he got older, he had some issues, and you could tell he was in a lot of pain. And towards the end, he had trouble walking on his back leg, and he would like fall down and then be in pain and had trouble getting back up. And I was actually downstairs recording a podcast. My wife was at the gym. I think the kids were with, and he was in his kennel to make sure that he didn't get hurt. But somehow he got hurt anyways and was freaking out and tried to bite his way out of his cage. Ended up getting his canine teeth stuck in the grate and just completely freaked out, like shattered his jaw. I went upstairs and there's a huge mess. Take him to the animal hospital, and he's already in a ton of pain from his back. Now his jaw's completely busted. You know, they put him under to get the grate off, and they're like, well, what do you want to do? And at that point, I'm like, just put him out of his misery. But it was not anticipated. Like, we knew it was coming, but we didn't know it was coming then. And so I remember my wife and I both, like, days after that, and we always told ourselves it's just a dog. But we bawled like babies. And for about 2 months, like, every time I drove past that animal hospital, the emotions would come back. So I definitely felt the grief from this section. And it kind of surprised me that that would be triggered so acutely by the loss of a pet. I always thought, when the dog dies, it's just a dog. We'll get a new one at some point. It'll be totally fine. And the kids were fine, but my wife and I were a mess. And then it would get re-triggered because they sent his collar back to us. And so Adelaide was really, really little. She couldn't even talk, but she found the collar and she would walk around the house panting like a dog. And like, because she missed the puppy, but she couldn't say like, oh, I miss the dog, so crazy. Now I know what to expect for next time, but got a new dog anyways. My opinion, everybody should have a dog.
You should. No cats, though.
No cats. I concur. All right, let's go into part 7, places we go with others. The emotions listed here: compassion, pity, empathy, sympathy, boundaries, and comparative suffering. And the one I want to call out, we don't really need to discuss this a whole lot, but comparative suffering, I feel this is something that we have all felt with COVID. And the idea with comparative suffering is that you compare your situation to somebody else's and it's not as bad, so you don't feel like you have the right to talk about it. And I don't want to discount all of the negative stuff that has happened with COVID and people who have lost loved ones. I personally haven't done that. We've lost some friends, some people that go to our church, but I feel like because I haven't had a brother or sister or somebody like kind of unexpected that just caught it and totally took them out and completely crushed our world, like, I don't have the right to talk about it. And she would basically say that you got to fight against that. And I want to call this out because I feel like I have seen this in just about everybody that I know, where they always temper their own experiences based off of somebody else who has gone through something worse. And I feel like that's really dangerous, because if you are comparing yourself to somebody else who has experienced something worse, then the natural reaction is like, well, I don't have it so bad, I'm just not going to say anything, which means you don't process that stuff, which means it just sits there and festers. Like, you got to talk about it. And just because somebody else went through something completely horrible doesn't mean that you don't have some trauma that needs to be processed as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on with the comparative suffering, because we see it everywhere, especially with COVID, because it's regularly used as justification for actions on both sides of every argument, it seems like. So it doesn't seem to matter what your viewpoint is. Like, we use that to justify what we're doing. But one of the pieces here that I want to call, and absolutely comparative suffering is a big one right now, but I think empathy is one we can't skip over here. And that's because she does bring that up in many of these different, the other emotions in this particular part. But it's basically the feeling of someone else's emotions and going through that pain with them, or understanding why they have dealt with things or why they've made the decisions that they have. And it's one that I feel like we could use an awful lot of right now. And nobody seems to want to, I shouldn't say nobody, that's extreme, but a lot of people don't want to do that because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for someone who is a Democrat to sit down with a Republican and try to figure out why they think the way they do. And vice versa, absolutely. It's very difficult for someone on the Republican side to sit down with a Democrat without, being humiliating to the other person. Like, stop it, basically. And we struggle to try to understand someone else's decisions because you don't know the whole story. You don't know what they've gone through. You don't know how they got there. So it's not something that you can just say, well, I don't even know what. He made a decision about choosing to not be vaccinated, so therefore, obviously, he's these 12 things. Well, you don't know that whole story, and you could flip it easily. They chose to be vaccinated, so obviously they are these 25 things. Like, that's not true. You don't know that. So don't make those assumptions because you don't know what they're going through and you don't know how they got there. So settle down. It's okay. Ask them questions about how they got there. Maybe help them with that decision, but don't force the issue.
Yeah. I also like in the empathy section, there's a whole bunch of empathy misses, she calls, which is sympathy, which is I feel sorry for you, judgment, you should feel shame, disappointment, you've let me down, discharging discomfort with blame, this feels terrible, who can we blame? You. Minimize or avoid, let's make this go away. Comparing or competing, if you think that's bad, which kind of gets into the comparative suffering. Speaking the truth, empower, don't upset people or make them uncomfortable, any advice giving or problem solving. I can fix this and I can fix you. I really like those statements that go along with those different descriptions. I feel that really helps me to understand those. Anything else from this section?
No, I think we should go into part 8, which is places we go when we fall short. And the emotions underneath of this are shame, self-compassion, perfectionism, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. I hesitate to say this, but I feel like this might be one of the most important parts in this whole book. So if you're going to skim this, which I don't think you'll be able to do, but this might be the big one. And there's 2 in here that really struck me. The first one is shame, which I think that's kind of her thing. Like, she brings that one up regularly and probably for good reason. But essentially, shame is believing that you're a bad person. Like, you are focused on yourself and you think you are bad for whatever reason. You name it. And you're flawed. There's something wrong with you. Even though there's probably not, even if there is, it doesn't matter. So having that shame does nothing for you that's positive. So trying to get past that is a very good thing, but not easy to do at the same time. But the one that I think struck me, that this might be the one that hit me the most in this entire book, and that was humiliation. And I say that because she explains in here how humiliation was a very big part, if not the deciding factor, of a bank of, 10 school shootings between 1996 and 1999, that the primary emotion behind those was humiliation. And then she goes on to explain how humiliation can lead to aggression and violence and dehumanization and humiliating others as a result of that. And that can come out whenever you have passionate political and cultural beliefs. But she also says shame and humiliation will never be effective social justice tools because the reaction to those is so violent. And I cannot help but think about how many times you see on social media of people just humiliating people as much as they possibly can because they don't have the same views as them.
Yeah.
And if you see what I just said, humiliation leads to violence and aggression, which then leads people to humiliating other people, which then leads to aggression and violence. Guess what we're doing? Yep. We've created this great big massive circle of being mad at each other and trying to hurt each other. And if you go back to the Schadenfreude, wishing ill on other people and being happy when it does happen. If you're rejoicing when somebody gets COVID, something is wrong. Like that's the type of thing that we're talking about. So all of that leads to a perpetual cycle of just horrible, horrible things and actions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, I had jotted down a quote from this section: never allow anyone to be humiliated in your presence. And I didn't, when I initially read this, did not jot down any action items. I think I'll make that one. There's no way, I'll ever mark that complete. But that's never stopped me before. So just kind of a mental reminder that that's important. Let the other person save face. I feel like we all have opportunities to practice that. The other thing that stood out to me from this section, and this is not nearly as big a deal as what you just described, but perfectionism, which is this self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels doing everything perfectly to avoid painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. I feel like we talk about this quite a bit because we're both creators, and I feel it's easy for people like us who make stuff to fall into this. So just a reminder that you are not what you accomplish or what you create, and to disconnect from the thought of what other people are going to think. So much easier said than done. I understand that, but good reminder.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Part 9 is places we go when we search for connection. And the emotions here are belonging, fitting in. Yes, those are different. Connection, disconnection, insecurity, invisibility, and loneliness. What stood out to you from this section?
The big ones were belonging and fitting in, and the difference between those. I mean, I could go on about probably the other 5 pretty easy, but like you mentioned, like it's easy to think of those two as the same, belonging and fitting in. But really, belonging is when you have a group of people who understand you and they accept you for who you are. Fitting in is when I'm morphing who I am in a situation in order to pseudo belong in a group for a temporary period. So if I'm trying to fit in, I'm going to tweak who I am to be in that group. Whereas if I'm belonging, I get to be who I truly am and belong in that group. So yes, I think there's so many different places you could take that, but
yeah, that's a real important distinction, and I'm glad that you called that out. I'll just add to that. I think that there's a connection that happens with the belonging versus the fitting in. Connection is the energy that exists when people feel they are seen, heard, and valued. When you belong and you are accepted because of who you are, that is when you are seen. When you fit in because you're like everyone else, that's kind of when you're invisible. So she also brings in Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, which from the bottom, physiological, then safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And I call that out because I've got this triangle thing that comes from the book embedded in my MindNode file. But this is a great example of how she has taken all of these concepts and she has applied her own style and put them into the book. There's lots of comics and drawings that go along with all this stuff. There's some really great ones in this particular section. So again, just a call, I guess, to get the hardcover printed version of this book rather than the the digital one.
yeah, goes a long ways.
All right. Part 10 is places we go when our heart is open. And the emotions listed here: love, lovelessness, heartbreak, trust, self-trust, betrayal, defensiveness, flooding, and hurt. And this is kind of where we start to realize how much you can get into any one of these, because trust specifically, she's written books on that.
Yeah, and she's also got like how do you define love? Like, good luck. Nail that one down, and you're going to have lots of people super excited, but there's so much that goes with that it's really tough to define it, which is like there's a lot that you could cover on these specific emotions. I can't say I have any of these that really stand out to me, other than just the fact that collectively, like this one kind of goes back and forth, right? So some of these collections are a perceived negative, right? When we fall short, all of those could be perceived as negative. Whereas if we go back to the one when it's beyond us, all the awe and amazement and such, like those are all positives, generally speaking. This one, when you open your heart, it's kind of back and forth. Like it's a crapshoot. Good luck, essentially. Some of these are considered very positive.
True.
Some of them are very difficult to deal with. Some of them, even though they're difficult, are positive to have gone through, right? So it does go back and forth. So I don't think I have one specific that jumped out to me, though.
The one that kind of jumped out to me was flooding. And just because I recognize from reading this section, flooding, by the way, is a sensation of feeling psychologically and physically overwhelmed during conflict, making it virtually impossible to have a productive problem-solving discussion. And the more pressure that we're under, the more likely we are to be flooded. So there's only so much that our bodies and our nervous systems can stand before they flip the switch and then you stop communicating and you start attacking. And I feel like having read this, I can identify points in my life where I have felt that, but also I feel like the threshold there is maybe different for everybody. And also I think there are things that you can do to increase your threshold so you don't fall into this as easily. So I just want to call that out and point out, I guess, that this is probably something we should all work on because when you get to this point, essentially nothing productive is going to come from this.
Yeah, for sure. I think that probably brings us to part 11 here. Places we go when life is good. Joy, happiness, calm, contentment, gratitude, foreboding joy, relief, and tranquility. And one thing that really jumped out to me here is that she does call out that joy and happiness are kind of in two different categories. Whereas like you have joy is kind of an unexpected, short-lasting thing, whereas happiness is very difficult for them to define because it's more of like a state of being over time. Like it's kind of a seasonal thing that can come and go. So it's not really a personality trait or a state as much as it is like a prolonged state, which they would say is somewhat different. So I hadn't really thought about it that way, like because we tend to use joy and happiness interchangeably. So I just hadn't really thought about it that way. There's so much of this, right? She just gives you these definitions and gives you the words for how you're feeling in certain situations. So I'm grateful for that, at least.
Yeah, and then she introduces foreboding joy, which is being afraid to lean into good news, wonderful moments, and joy. And I don't know about you, but this hit home for me. She says parents experience this a lot with their kids, but the basic idea here is that something good happens and you kind of think, oh, this is short-lived and something bad is going to happen right after this. So I don't really know that there's anything to do about that other than to recognize when this is happening and label it as, oh, there's that foreboding joy again, and recognize it for what it is and try to dismiss it. The other thing I thought was really cool about this was under calm. She says there's two questions about calm as a practice, which is, do I have enough information to freak out? That's question number one. And normally it's no. And then number two, will freaking out help? And that's always no. So if you were to create like one of those decision tree diagrams and you looked at this every time you got some bad news, for example, and it started triggering that emotion of probably anxiety is the thing that would trigger this for me, that state of freaking out. That's not one on the list here, but we can picture what that looks like. So you start feeling that, and then, okay, what were the questions here? Walking through those, you would maybe temper that a little bit. I'm not sure. Maybe I should print that out and hang that up somewhere.
Sure. All right, if you go to, unless you got something else here, if you go to part 12,
I
think it's where we're at.
Yep.
Places we go when we feel wronged. Anger, contempt, disgust, dehumanization, hate, self-righteousness. And if you remember me talking earlier about, we'll talk about this later because it ties into humiliation or discouragement or anger and such. Like it nostalgia to some degree. Like if you start to look at each of these in particularly, and I have to say every single one of these struck me, so I'm probably not going to talk about any of them because of that. But if you think about so much, and obviously she's writing this in the middle of the pandemic, so she brings up COVID quite a bit inside of it, which is maybe why we've talked about it more than we normally would on this show. But when you get into things like contempt, or disgust, dehumanization, like trying to give the other a different name that's like rats and such. Like they talk about how, well, that's what Hitler did. So if you are doing things like that, you're on the same track as Hitler. So keep that in mind if you do these things. It's tough to read any of these and not think of something that's gone on politically or socially. But that I feel like is the obvious direction to take this. Like it's very simple to say, here's what our political landscape is. Here's how each of these anger, contempt, disgust, dehumanization, hate, and self-righteousness, like these are all happening on every side of the party, on either party. But again, that's the easy way. If you think about your day-to-day and even your past, when these have come up in yourself, this is a little more humbling and a lot more difficult to just skip past and just say, oh yeah, they're crazy. And I don't want to get into politics because they're all like, you can do that. But if you try to think about how you've been angry with someone or something that has caused contempt in yourself, this gets a lot more real. And I have thought of, as I've been talking here, it's like I've thought about 3 or 4 different examples, none of which I can share, but I wish I could because it would solidify this a little more. But it's something that's a lot more difficult to process, I think. It's still a good thing to process, but not as simple to just skip past.
Yeah, there's a lot to be dissected here. One of the coolest visuals in the book, I think, is the 4 horsemen of contempt that she talks about in this section, which she's got a cool graphic here: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, and then kind of the how to stop them. So contempt, which is I'm better than you, you're less than me, for example. You can describe your own feelings and needs without putting yourself on a pedestal above somebody else. This is a lot of, I don't think anybody really lives their whole life in this section. I'm sure there are people, but the growth-minded people who listen to Bookworm probably dip their toes in these waters every once in a while, but can navigate their way out of them. I feel like there are a lot of good tips for what to do when in this particular section. For example, it's talking about anger. That's a good emotional indicator. It's kind of like the check engine light on your car. So when you're feeling angry, and she talks about that being a full contact action emotion, you're ready to put up the dukes, then that's a good point to look inside and say, why do I feel this way? And then again, that very effective metaphor of the being on a journey and being a map maker, you can realize, okay, I'm heading towards the bad place, and how do I make a course correction and head towards the good place instead?
Yeah, for sure.
Should we go to the last section?
Yes, let's do it.
So the last section is part 13, places we go to self-assess. Just a couple of them here: pride, hubris, and humility. Anything you want to talk about specifically from this section?
I think the only thing that really that I want to mention is just that pride isn't necessarily bad, because I think we have that connotation, and it's easy to say, like, don't be so prideful. Like when people say that, there's always the connotation of like you're puffing yourself up too much, like that sort of thing. Pride comes before the fall. But it's simply, like the way she defines it, pride is a feeling of pleasure or celebration related to our accomplishments or efforts. And I know that pride generally has a negative connotation. There are some words that just have that tied to them, but it's hard to remember that there are good forms of pride sometimes. And if you've done something and you've been successful at it, it's okay to be happy and glad that you were able to achieve that. I think it gets to be on the negative side, when you start bringing it up all the time and you make a point of making sure that other people know that you did a good job, like that starts to get into different territory when you start doing that. So don't go that far with it, but just keep in mind, like, it is okay to be happy about success. That's all right.
I think the point where things get negative with pride is when it flips from a trait to a state, or vice versa. Sorry, I messed those up. State is the temporary condition. Trait is the part of your personality. So if pride is a temporary celebration of something good that you've done, that's fine. You know, you need to celebrate your wins. But when you stay there, that's when I think it can kind of translate into hubris, which is an inflated sense of one's own innate abilities. It's tied to the need for dominance than to actual accomplishments. And you tend to go back and celebrate the fact that, oh, I did this one thing one time. You know, so being willing to disconnect from something after a little while, whether something good happens or something bad happens, you know, grieve for a little while, celebrate for a little while, but then be willing to move on. Don't set up camp there. I think the most powerful thing for me in this entire book was one sentence from the section on humility, which is kind of how she ends the book, or that part of the book anyways. There's a couple things in the very end of it kind of as a reference, but she has this sentence that says, "I'm here to get it right, not to be right." And if I were to summarize my life in a single sentence, that's very appropriate. I think I might steal that.
Yeah, she mentions that as far as like how she conducts her research, right? So the goal isn't to make your opinions and your hypotheses correct. It's to figure out what is correct. Like that's essentially what she's getting at there. Yeah, absolutely. That's a tough one to grapple with though too.
Totally. And you have to be able to recognize that what you do and how you feel based on what you've done, probably, that does not define you as a person. And you're constantly trying to, I would hope, I mean, this is kind of my mindset. I'm pretty sure it's your mindset. Probably most of the people listen to Bookworm's mindset, that we have not arrived and we want to continue to do better with what we have. Keep going, keep growing, permanent beta, however you want to define it. But none of us have achieved our final state, and ultimately that is a good thing. Again, hearkening back to the mindset book. It's amazing how much of this stuff we read now harkens back to mindset.
Yeah, it's like the foundation that the others build on.
Yep. Well, you got any action items from this book?
Do better. Like I don't even know. Like it's so many places I could take it and so many things I could write down, but I've been sitting on this completed for about 4 or 5 days now, and it continues to come up regularly, things that I should be better at doing or understand better, a lot of which have to do with my kids, but I haven't nailed any of it down to this is a thing I'm going to do, other than just be aware of what's going on and be willing to process emotions out loud. But that's not something I do naturally. So there's that piece there. But I have no idea how to even make that an action item other than just do better. So do better, I guess. I don't know.
All right. Adding it to the list for follow-up. We'll have 2 ridiculous action items to cover for follow-up next time. Joe's do better, and then mine is never allow anyone to be humiliated in my presence. That was not one I jotted down ahead of time because there really aren't any real action items from this book, but there's lots of things that you can recognize, like next time I'm in this situation, this is the tactic, and this is the one, as we were discussing it, that really jumped out to me. Like, I want to make sure this does not happen in any of the situations that I may find myself in. I feel like I tend to fight for people who feel this way anyways, just because based on the emotional intelligence assessments I've taken, I tend to have high empathy. So I do feel that when people are humiliated, and I want to alleviate that, but this is a good reminder. Like, even if you try to do it, but it doesn't happen, like, keep fighting for it. Don't let it end in that state. We have this phrase that we use with our kids always, like, end on a win. You take them somewhere and they're having fun and they're getting crazy. And that's about the time I look at my wife and we've got this signal, like, wrap it up.
Yep.
Because if we stay here too much longer, somebody's going to get hurt and there'll be tears, and that just ruins the whole experience,
Yep.
So, all right. Style and rating. This is my book. So I go first. The style I mentioned a little bit at the beginning. This is totally unique to just about everything that we have ever read for Bookworm, but it is also totally awesome. It's definitely get the hardcover version. Don't just listen to it. Don't get the ebook version, because it is a beautiful book. It is a reference work. It's almost like a coffee table type book. Even the cover looks great, but the visual design is awesome. There's a lot of like original graphics, a very pleasing, fairly minimalistic, I would say, visual style for a lot of the diagrams and the comics and things that are in here, but really, really well done. The other unique thing about this, as I mentioned at the beginning, is it's a combination of the research that she's done, which is a ton, and personal experiences and stories, which I feel are very, very effective in helping you understand and even feel some of these emotions. Now, that being said, you have to recognize that you might be wrecked when you pick this book up. If you're just going to grab this book and crank through it like we did, you're going to uncover some things. And that's not a bad thing, but you have to be willing to wrestle through some of that stuff. So if you're looking for a positive, pick-me-up type book, this is not the one. But if you are embracing the continuous improvement, personal growth, and you're looking for something that will give you a more extensive vocabulary for describing and dealing with these emotions, which is important because, as she described back in the introduction, that's part of the healing process, then this is absolutely a phenomenal book. There's a reason this is like #1 bestseller everywhere that you look. And Brené Brown, I feel, is like the only person who could have written this book. So I haven't read a whole lot of her other books. We did cover Daring Greatly back in the day, and this does not read like any of the other books that she has written. Probably would be my guess. There's like little snippets of things, but it very quickly moves on to the next thing because there's 87 different emotions that she's trying to cover here. I would definitely rate this 5 stars, though. I feel like this is one of those books that, for people who listen to Bookworm, this is an essential piece for your library. And it is something that you will not only benefit from reading through, it is something that you will probably go back to again and again. Just knowing some of the things that are in here, I feel like the next time I find myself in one of those places, I will probably reach for this book and go back and reread that section and be like, oh yeah, these are the things that got me to this place, and this is the way out. And I feel that's going to have phenomenal value. I mean, if there is a single book from the entire Bookworm library that we have read that if you were to somehow figure out the amount of future value per dollar that you paid, this one probably is off the charts, the top one on that list. I don't think there's anything in here that specifically, like an action item, that is going to change my life, but I feel the sum total of all of the things that she discussed definitely will. Time be told, whether that proves true or not, but it just feels like one of those things that's going to pay dividends for the rest of your life once you understand there's a whole bunch more here than mad, sad, and glad.
Yeah, by far. By far. I think that when I pick this up, one of the first things I tend to do, thanks to How to Read a Book, thank you, Adler, and I looked through the table of contents at the beginning and just saw places we go when, and saw that that's how she had each part laid out. It's like, oh, well, that's what she means by Atlas of the Heart. Well, then underneath of that, you see all the emotions. And I started flipping through the book and was seeing some of the definitions before I even started reading it. And I remember setting it down. I had a cup of tea with me at the time, and I took a sip of the tea, and then I looked out the window, and I told one of my daughters, I don't remember which one it was, like, this one's going to be hard to read. Not from a difficulty of writing stance, because Brown does an amazing job of telling stories, of laying out the facts, the research. She's amazing at that and can do some pretty extensive explanations in very short spans for paragraphs and sentences and such. So she does an excellent job at writing. So you can tell she's spent a lot of time with this book. And you can tell this is, I don't want to say this is one of her life's work pieces, because I don't know that she would say that, but it feels that way to me. Like, she's done so much over the last 25, maybe approaching 30 years of research that she has put into this, that it's easy to see how, like, this is a culmination of a lot in her life. And it's very easy to read from a technical stance. It's very difficult to read from an emotional stance, I find. Again, that's me. Like Mike said, you're going to get wrecked. You don't do this for fun. You do this because it's good for you. But as Mike is saying, you absolutely need to pick this up. It is most certainly a 5.0. I don't know how I could not join you on that. But this is something you have to pick up. And I will echo Mike's sentiments. Skip the Kindle, skip the audiobook. You got to pick up the hardback. The one and only complaint I have with that hardback is it's a little weird to write in, because they used a little more of a glossy page than they normally would in a book, which makes it a little more difficult to underline and write in, which I tend to do. So just be aware of that. But that's a fairly minor point, because it's not actually that bad. It's just a little bit less easy than others. So anyway, that's the only thing I have to say against it. But that is it. Outside of that, this is one that, you made the comment, like, maybe this goes on a coffee table. That's actually what I was processing that. It's actually a really good idea, because this is something that Atlas of the Heart, like, it's one of those things that will draw you in. It's like, what do you mean by that? And you pick it up, and then you can start flipping through it. Yeah. And it's easy for someone to catch up on something very quickly. Like, oh, what does she say about anger? And you can flip over there, and you can get the gist of what she's talking about in the span of a minute. Like, it does not take long to get the definition and figure out what she's talking about if you're just skimming. Like, you can get a lot just from skimming this book, but it's going to take some time to actually read it emotionally, I think. So please pick this up. You got to read this one. If you haven't read other bookworm books and you just use us to skip the reading part, don't do that on this one, because there's a lot we did not cover. There's tons we didn't talk about and we just skipped over. So you'll definitely get value out of it. So for sure, pick this one up.
All right. So let's put Atlas of the Heart on the shelf. What's next, Joe?
Yeah, so the one up next is How to Change by Katie Milkman. And this comes on my side kind of off the heels of one of your last books, which was the 4,000 Weeks. It's like, okay, well, how do we think about what we're doing for change? And what are good ways to do this? This is like, you and I have flipped categories here recently. I don't know what that is. So trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what's some of the science say around, like, how do you make changes to your life? That's kind of what I'm going for here. And then after that, what are you doing, Mike?
After that, I'm going to force you to help me complete my action item for this time and collect more models and read through Personal Socrates by Mark Champagne. This is a book I had mentioned previously. I had picked it up. I had gifted it to people. I've started it, but I have not gone through it completely. But I feel this is going to lead to some great discussion. Again, not your typical bookworm book, couple of sections, 10 chapters, etc. So we'll have to get creative in how we go through this one. But I feel like the discussion from this is going to be great. And from the moment I cracked it open, I knew we were going to talk about this at some time. And having talked through the year of recalibration and the action item from this time, and especially the discussion after this, and embracing the things that we typically don't naturally gravitate towards, I feel like this is the right time for this book as well. For me personally, but I also think you're going to really enjoy it. So that's what we'll do next. All right, you got any Gap books?
No, I've been busy with insurance. So, and now I get the honors of trying to buy a vehicle. So that's what I'm in the middle of. Any extra waking moment that I have, that's where it's been going lately. So, no, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
You?
I do have a Gap book, which I have started, but then put down because I did not like it. And that is The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction by Alan Jacobs. I was kind of disappointed I didn't enjoy this one, but just I got like 3/4 of the way through it and just couldn't finish it. Just the style of it did not really resonate for me. He's a professor and he's kind of extolling the virtues of the Mortimer Adler book at the beginning, but then it kind of drifts into a whole bunch of personal opinion that didn't really hit with me. So that brings up an important point, though, which is why I wanted to talk about it a little bit, is that for Bookworm, we pick books and we have to read them because we're going to have a discussion on the entire book. And there are some books that I'm very grateful for having muscled through. But there are so many books in the world.
Yes.
So many books that I want to read that if one just isn't doing it for you, be willing to let it go and go read something else. Because what will happen if you continue to force yourself to read books that you don't like is that you're just going to not like reading. And eventually you're going to stop reading. And that's not a good place.
Yeah, that's fair. Or if you muscle through things, you challenge yourself to stick with things when they're difficult, or you potentially learn something that you weren't expecting to learn and it challenges your viewpoints. Like there's that side of it as well. So just because you don't agree with something or don't like it doesn't necessarily mean it's a blanket stop, but just
correct.
Like you got to float that line a little bit. It's not an easy answer.
Yeah, you got to temper it. So if you're reading something you don't like, then go read something you do like. And that's kind of his advice from that book, which is kind of interesting. Maybe that's where I felt the permission to set that one down, but just was not doing it for me. It's like a collection of essays, and just the whole style sounds very, I don't know. I don't want to be negative. Maybe other people really like that book.
That's okay.
So
that's a tough
we'll
one.
Just leave
I've
it
read
there.
that one.
Okay.
It's kind of a challenging one. I did finish it, but that was, I don't remember why. It's a fairly short book. It's not super long.
It is.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you to everybody who showed up and attended live. We actually have a pretty happening discussion in the YouTube chat here. So if you want to join us, there'll be links to all that stuff in the show notes. Joe always tweets out from the Bookworm FM account on Twitter when we are going to go live and has the link. So thanks to everybody who did that. Thanks especially to the Bookworm Club premium members who pay $5 a month to help us keep the lights on. Really means a lot to both Joe and I. It's the only way that we make money from the podcast, and it's not a lot of money, but it pays for the the servers and buys us a couple of books. So thank you so much for those of you who support our work directly. The link to do that, I believe, is bookworm.fm/membership. Again, link in the show notes. When you do sign up, you get access to a few perks, a wallpaper that I created, some Gap episodes that Joe's recorded over the years. But probably the big thing at this point, I assume you're okay with me framing it that way, because I do update this periodically, is all of the book notes that I do take. I upload those as both PDF files and MindNode files. So you can, if you use MindNode like I do to take notes on books, you can download those and use that as the jumping off point for taking the book notes yourself, which I never anticipated that people would actually want to do, but get a lot of requests for that kind of stuff. So all that stuff is in the club. And again, if you want to join, bookworm.fm/membership.
Yeah, you're not out of line with the whole, the big perk is Mike's stuff, all his notes, by far. That's the best part of the club for sure. So definitely go join. if you're interested in that. And if you're one of those amazing people who's reading along like Martin, you need to pick up How to Change by Katie Milkman, and we'll go through that one with you in a couple of weeks.